How shall we start? John, you're not hiding. You're not hiding. Did the bulk of the work here. Come on. Good morning, everybody. We want to thank you all for coming. I want to introduce some special guests that we have here from BCI, and our Attorney General, Ohio State Attorney General, is here. Mr. David Yost, to help us because they've been instrumental in helping us with this particular case. So back in 2018, and I don't know if you remember, a young woman was discovered partially buried in a mulch bed in an apartment complex off of Vine Street. And there had been a rainstorm, and so some of the mulch had washed off, and her body was discovered, and it had a rose on its chest. And we knew that this was somebody had carefully, or at least tried to bury her, and somebody who had been cared for and loved. And we put out notices with pictures of her clothing and the jewelry that she had on at the time, and her appearance was not such that we could really reveal it to the public. So we had working with artists who could come up with what she might have looked like. And we've had several public notices and press conferences trying to get the public to help us identify her. It's been 5 years, and we still have not identified her. We had a few people come forward after the last one, but none of those clues panned out to identify her exactly. John Hatfield, who's an investigator in my office, has spent, I don't even know how many hundreds of hours on this case trying to identify her. But recently, with the help of some incredible artists and BCI and the Attorney General's office, and using some new digital capabilities, we've been able to create some images of what we think she might have looked like with different hairstyles. I don't know if, did you want to talk about how this was done? I think that would be an interesting process to describe.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Dave Yost. I'm the Ohio Attorney General. The Ohio Attorney General's office houses the Bureau of Criminal Identification and Investigation. And we have been pleased to work with Dr. Sammarco on this for a number of years now. The original clay reconstruction was done in 2019, the year following the discovery. And as Dr. Sammarco just said, we didn't exactly make a lot of forward progress on that. Since then, we have new technological tools, and we partner with the Ohio State University, and now they can take that reconstruction and apply digital tools to it to approximate different types of appearance. So you see up here on the easel the way we think she might have looked, and we are publicizing these renderings today in hopes that somebody will recognize her and come forward. As Dr. Sammarco said, when she was discovered, there was a rose on her chest, and somebody put that there. That didn't happen by accident. Somebody loved this woman and knows who she is. She deserves to pass from this earth with her name, and our plea today is to please come forward. Call the tip line, be anonymous if you must, but let us know who this is. Very excited about the development of this technology. We've already had one instance where a reconstruction has led to identification of a cold case and an unidentified person. With me today is our forensic artist from BCI who has done this. Sam Molnar is one of the leading experts in the country on this kind of work. And I've asked her to be here today so that she can describe in a little more detail for you what actually is involved in this process. So, Sam?
Thank you so much. At BCI, we love when we get the opportunity to work with local agencies to help with these types of cases. Working with Hamilton County, working with Cincinnati Police Department, it's been a great partnership. There's been a lot of work done by everybody on this case to try to identify her. Unfortunately, we still haven't been able to do that. We've done DNA testing, we've done facial reconstructions, tons of investigative work by the agency, and we're still trying to ID her. So something that we have been working on with Ohio State University is this new digital rendering. A lot of times with unidentified cases, there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of things that I have to kind of guess or estimate. One of those things can be eye color, hair color. Sometimes the age range can be a large gap, like 30 to 60 years. So what this new technology allows us to do is we can take, just with an iPhone, a bunch of photos of the reconstruction that I've completed, and then create a 3D model of that digitally, and then we can put that in a software that allows us to change those attributes, change hair color, change eye color, change different things. So in these types of cases where all we have is skeletal remains, we can generate different images that we can push out to the public to help get this person identified. So in this case, we have a little more information. We know that she had medium length, brown, gray hair. We know that it was wavy. So we've generated more images being able to add the hair color on this case. I think the frustrating thing with this one is, she had a name written in her pants. We don't know if she borrowed those pants or if that could be her last name that's in there. I always, every time I have one of these cases, I always want to just urge the public to call your local agency, call our agency. If you have a loved one that's missing, we would love to help you. Somebody you haven't talked to in a long time, there's a lot of things that we can do to try to locate them. And if we can't locate them, we want to work with you to get DNA so that way we can identify these people. If something bad happened to her, we want to know. And the first step is getting her name back. Once she has her name back, then we can actually start working an investigation or giving family funerals that they deserve. So I'm super grateful to be a part of this, and I'm super glad everyone is here covering it because her face needs blasted out so that way everyone can see it and hopefully we can get her identified.
I do want to say that we do not suspect foul play in this. So, please, if you have any information, don't be afraid to come forward. We don't suspect that this is a homicide. We'd just like to be able to identify her. And you see a skull next to the clay sculpture, and that's a 3D printed skull based off of a CT scan. And there's a lot of things that we can do. We do have a CT scan in our office here. We have a 64-slice CT scan, and we can actually do the 3D rendering here, not printing, but the 3D rendering of the skull. And and in her case, she wasn't skeletalized, so she did have soft tissue on her bones, and she did have hair. So that was a little bit of a boost as far as trying to create a rendering for her. But we do have the capability of 3D reconstruction and two-dimensional reconstruction with the CT scan we have. And this was done with the assistance of the Ohio State University back in 2018, 2019, because we didn't move into this great building until 2021, so we didn't have a CT scanner until then. But again, we don't suspect that there's any foul play here, and we would just love to be able to identify her. Her information was put into NamUs, and like I said, we've had a few people coming forward with over the last 5 years with some information, but nothing has led to a real name and a real identification. John Hatfield, would you like to say anything? So John Hatfield was our investigator on the case, and he's really been spending a lot of time and effort on this. But anybody have any questions?
Yes, Dr. Sammarco, you said no foul play, but did you ever determine the cause of death?
We believe, I think it was natural, so we weren't really worried about somebody, and especially the way she was partially buried, and that she was buried and left. I mean, obviously, somebody cared enough to give her some sort of a burial and a flower on her chest, so.
You and Mr. Yost touched on this, but first of all, how often do you see cases like this? I mean, we're talking almost, 5 years now. How often do you see those cases, and speak to how sad this is? Someone could go, missing for this long and not have any.
We've had quite a few cases, I think. I mean, for an office our size, maybe not that many, but we've had cases from the 90s and the early 2000s that we were able to, in the last 5 or 6 years, been able to discover who these people were. So, the fact that we're still working these cold cases and trying to get answers, we all care enough that we do. We would love to be able to put a name to her and inform a family and give them some closure. I mean, that's what it really comes down to. And, the two most recent ones that we had, one from the 90s, we lovingly called the Pearl Lady because she had been discovered with a string of pearls. We were able to identify, and that was, kind of a multi-state investigation that came through with some answers, and we were able to give her daughters some closure because they didn't know what had happened to her. And then there was a family in New York where their loved one, it was their daughter, who was discovered along the side of Highway 75 near Princeton High School, if you remember, a few years ago. And we were able to identify her with the help of BCI and their artists and their investigators. And that gave some closure to that family. So it's not unusual. Fortunately, we have not had too many of these cases, but we do get these cases, and we're not an exception. I mean, all over, all the different coroner's offices have some unidentified cases, but most of the time, we're able to identify somebody within a few months or even the same year. So there are very few cases like her that have extended out over multiple years. And we're still trying to identify her. We're still trying to find and use these new methods that our partners in the investigation, BCI and the Attorney General's office, when something new comes up, they try to apply it to the cases that we have to see if we can identify somebody.
It seems kind of odd and unusual that, you mentioned someone cared enough, they took the time to partially bury this woman, but yet still no one has come forward. How unusual is that?
Well, it is unusual. Somebody usually comes up with some information. In this particular case, we don't know how many people were with her. If it was one person, we don't even know if that person is still alive. And if nobody else had any contact with either one of them, if nobody else has reported them missing, then they just get lost. And I think that's what we're saying here is if you have any relatives that you have not been able to contact for a while, and you can check NamUs, you can check the database and see if they're in that database and maybe at a location that you last heard from them, and then maybe backtrack from that. But you can always, if you have any tips or if you have any concerns, you can always contact your local law enforcement. In our particular case here, you can do it anonymously. You can call our office. You can call Crime Stoppers. You can call BCI, the AG's office. There's a lot of different numbers. We would just love to know who she is. You don't have to give your own personal information, but if you have any knowledge, if she looks familiar, if you know somebody in her family that might know more, that please forward the information to us. We'd be grateful.
Attorney General Yost, can you, I know we've talked about this before, but this program is really just kind of come into fruition in the last 5 to 6 years with Sam actually teaching herself how to sculpt and things like that. You want to talk about how this has become an emphasis for BCI and working around the state with other agencies? I know this is a statewide initiative for you guys, and you put a lot of resources into it.
Thanks. And it's important, James, to remember that BCI doesn't do stuff on its own. We're a force multiplier. We're here to support local law enforcement, local prosecutors, local coroners' offices, and so we don't go off on our own. We have to be invited in. Now, that being said, we started this cold case unit when I came into office specifically because everybody matters, and we have too many cases. While it's rare, we have too many cases where we don't know the identity of the person, or there are times when a crime has been committed. That's not the case here. As Dr. Sammarco said, we don't suspect foul play in this case. But in many of the other cases that our cold case unit is involved with, there was a rape or a murder. So developing the capacity to support local law enforcement agencies in trying to develop these cases is a critical function, I think, for BCI. We exist to provide the additional scale and expertise where every agency can't afford to have a Sam Molnar on staff. So we're providing those force multipliers for local government.
Could you explain how the teeth you may have been able to follow that lead, or the name and the pants, if you were able to track any of that?
We've tried every different way to try. Well, here's the problem with the names and the clothing. They could have borrowed the clothing. They could have gotten them from a Goodwill store or, a soup kitchen where they had extra clothing. So we can't rely on the information that we find in the clothing. As far as the teeth are concerned, we do dental x-rays and we do a CT scan and we can simulate a panorex using the CT information. But without dental information from family or somebody related, then we can't really match those teeth. We have to have something pre-mortem to be able to match. So yes, we use dental x-rays for identifying people, but that's usually because we're given dental x-rays from their dentist or family member that has access to them, and then we can match.
You said that she was partially skeletalized and she had tissue. Do you know when she died, or do you know how long she was buried before she was?
I think it was only like 8 days or so. We were thinking she wasn't really skeletonized. She really still had a lot of soft tissue on her. But she was partially decomposed as far as the skin surface is concerned. So that's why I said we really couldn't show her actual image to the public. And we did show clothing and the jewelry, but we weren't able to show her actual image.
Question for all of you, just on a personal level, what is it like working on these cases for you?
Well, as I said, everybody counts, and there's few things that are more bothersome on a human level than somebody who doesn't even have a name. To pass from this life, and not only nobody was there, perhaps, but to not even have a memory that this was who you were, is one of those things that it strips our identity, literally, and that's why this is important to me personally. Somebody loved this woman. She had a mother and a father. She may have had siblings. She certainly had people who knew her, who went to school with her. She deserves to be laid to rest with an identity. And that's our appeal today. Help us to write that last chapter in her life.
Does your DNA database access like the public DNA databases before ancestries and that kind of thing to see if it gets hits?
No, obviously. One of the things we definitely do, in fact, I've said before, not like you see on TV. We don't invite the family in to take a look at their loved ones and say, yes, that's Uncle Joe. We don't do that. We identify people by scientific means, whether that's DNA, dental x-rays, regular x-rays, fingerprints. There's always going to be something backing up what we think we know about that person. And if they have ID on them or not, we're still using scientific means. So yes, we do access CODIS, the FBI's DNA database, but you understand there's only about 10 to 12 million people actually in that database. There are over 400 million people in the United States. So sometimes what we have to do is, if we suspect this is so-and-so, is try and reach out to the family and say, do you have any personal items of this person where we can extract DNA from them? And then if we have a known sample, we can match it. And so that's a different way in case they're not in the database or any of the databases. We have used some of the Ancestry.com, 23andMe databases. BCI has helped us, and they've helped a lot of different jurisdictions around the state in trying to get some more information on somebody who may be a suspect in a double homicide case or something, and that's been helpful to get second and third and fourth degree relatives and be able to get some information. But as far as identifying people, we try and use the scientific means to do that.
No, but similar to how they tried to identify, or how they identified the California serial killer a few years back, I mean, is that something that you, I don't know, are you saying you don't do that or you do that?
No, we absolutely look at all the different DNA databases available out there publicly to look at that information. And then we do work with BCI, and they have greater capability of access to those DNA databases. And so when we hit a roadblock and we're not getting anywhere, we do ask BCI, hey, can you work with your resources in the Attorney General's office to see if we can get some more information?
I think you might be asking also about genetic genealogy, where we're not looking for a specific hit in CODA saying, oh, it's a match, 1 in 4 quadrillion chance, this is the right person. We also do an examination of the databases to look for patterns within the genetic structure to see whether we can identify familial connections. And that was done in this case as well, and we haven't turned up a positive result at this point that would enable us to continue. Once again, why it's so important, if this looks like somebody you knew or are related to that you haven't heard from a while, please let us know who that is. Even if you aren't sure that that's the right thing, that gives us some place to begin to pull the string and may lead us somewhere. And if it doesn't, you at least tried.
Any more questions? Thank you all. Go
From the
ahead.
perspective of these pictures, so if these 5 pictures are something that you couldn't do with that, that's basically what you're saying. That's-
Right. So the clay sculpture was based on the bone structure and what we knew about her European origin, the hair that she had and the type of hair, whether it's curly, kinky, blonde, brown, black. I mean, we look at all those things and try and come up with a facial structure, and that's something that Sam does. But as far as being able to change the eye color, the hair color, trying different hairstyles, this is where the digital tool is, beyond what we've been able to do. And so the new capabilities really expand our ability to guess what this person looked like. Sam, do you want to talk about the bone structure and how you do
Yeah.
the rendering?
So when I do the clay recreations, I've gone to trainings to learn how to do that. And basically, like she said, you start with the skull, and there's different measurements, so different tissue depth markers that I'll put on the skull. I'll sculpt the muscle structure first, and then I start to hit those different tissue depth markers. So there might be different tissue depth in your cheek compared to the bridge of your nose, just depending. And then I will generate the sculpture. One thing I always try to look for is things that are unique. So does this person have an overbite, an underbite? Did they have a broken nose that may be healed, tooth loss, things like that, and try to accentuate those things. And then also anything that I can learn from the crime scene. So or the scene in general. So the clothing, the size of the clothing that they were found in, is there any hair left behind? Was it braided? Like she said, is it curly? Different things like that I want to make sure that I can capture as many known details as I can, put it in the sculpture, and then the digital renderings just give us a chance to reach more people. So we can style her hair different ways. Maybe she always wore her hair back in a ponytail, so people wouldn't recognize her as much if she had her hair down, or vice versa. So it's just, this is a new tool as a way to reach more people. You had asked about the personal level. For me, we work missing person cases all the time. We host missing person events. Family members of missing people come to those events, and their desperation to know what happened to their loved one is what drives me to do these. It's a really cool way to use art to help people, and I see how many people are out there looking for their loved one. Or a lot of times when these cases do get identified, they weren't reported missing, but they weren't reported missing not because they weren't loved, but because maybe they lost touch with them over time. Maybe family is separated and they don't know how to look. So this is just a way to tell people how to help find their missing loved one, even if you just lost touch over time.
Sam or Attorney General, can you talk about how many more cases statewide you've applied this new tool to? And are you going to go around and try again for some of these? I know there's several dozen that you have up on the website that are still cold. You're trying to identify.
Yeah.
Are you starting reapplying this to that and try and renew those cases?
Yep, so we started in Stark County, was the first one that we had kind of applied this whole process to. And so we've done a couple out there. This would be the third one that we've applied the new digital renderings to. I think we have another one out in Akron that could probably benefit from that. So hopefully we can reach out to Akron and get that one going. I would say almost half, if not more than half, of these sculptures have actually been identified through genealogy, through DNA testing, through people calling in tips, which has been awesome. So I really only have a few on my desk that are still kind of this state where I have a sculpture or something I can put into that program to generate new images for. So there's just a few, but we're trying to circle back to some of these cases and apply any new technology or new technique that we have to help, bring some answers to families.
One of the purposes of our office, what does the coroner do? I get asked that all the time. We identify people. It's definitely one of the things that we do. We try and discover the circumstances of the death and if there's any foul play. We try and bring closure for families. And when somebody's been missing, they don't get closure. And if they don't know how one of their loved ones died, they don't get closure. And if they feel like a crime was committed and their loved one died and nobody pursued it, they don't get closure. So we try and seek the truth and justice for the families that are left behind. And that's why it's important. That's why the purpose of this office and what we do here is important.
Thank you all for coming.
Any other questions, or should we close the press conference? All right, thank you all for coming.